Morning. We have a quorum and it's the appointed time for the meeting. Let me call to order the joint meeting of the panel on welfare services and the panel on education. First item, election of chairman. In accordance with House Rule 22K, when a panel joins meeting with another panel in matters of common concern, that meeting will have to decide which chairman will chair the meeting. Mr. Ip Kin-yun, the chairman of the panel on education, has agreed that I should chair this meeting. If members do not object, I will continue to stay in the chair. At the same time, we are allowing the deputations and individuals to come in, and the clerk will also be inviting the administration to come in as well. The item for discussion today is provision of speech therapy services for elderly persons, persons with disabilities, and students with special needs. Our papers have either been tabled or have been sent together with the agenda. We'll allow the deputations and individuals to settle down. We have a total of 14 deputations and individuals. I'd like to remind the deputations and individuals first. I'd like to thank you for coming to LegCo to let us know your views. In front of you, you have a microphone and an earpiece. Channel 0 is the floor, Channel 1 Cantonese, Channel 2 English, Channel 3 Putonghua. I'd like to remind you that all your oral remarks made at the panel today will not be covered or protected by the Legislative Council Powers and Privileges Ordinance Cap 382, meaning you have to take responsibility for what you say here. Each of you will have 3 minutes, and before I start the meeting, I'd like to thank members because members of both panels will have to attend to form a quorum. But this is actually a topic that we have rarely discussed. I think this is the first meeting of its kind in this legislative session. Today we have this public hearing so we can listen to deputations and individuals, and so that we can have an exchange between the administration and members of the two panels. We'd like to see how we can take forward speech therapy services forward in Hong Kong. I'd like to ask the administration, would you like to say anything before we hear from the deputations? Let me give an introduction. Yes, please. In response to some members' proposal, we'd like to take you through the speech therapy services we provide for elderly persons, persons with disabilities, and students with special needs. We attach great importance to the well-being of elderly persons, persons with disabilities, and children with special needs, and provide them with various kinds of support services at the community, residential care home, and preschool rehabilitation levels, including speech therapy services, to cater for their rehabilitation needs and to improve the quality of life. Besides, the government also accords priority to the care of students with special educational needs, including students with speech and language impairment. The Education Bureau has been providing posts of speech therapists, and also we have special resources for special schools so they can provide school-based speech therapy services for students in need.
更加有效咁樣咧，喺學
so that they are able to develop and learn social skills more effectively. In terms of elderly service units, the government provides speech therapy services for residential care homes for the elderly, daycare centers and units for the elderly, and home care services teams to assist elderly persons with swallowing difficulties or speech impairment. As for persons with disabilities, the SWD, through early education training centers, special childcare centers, integrated program kindergarten childcare centers, and on-site preschool rehabilitation services provide speech therapy services to help language development of the children and SEN of an early age. And in 2019-20, the SWD will strengthen the staffing of speech therapists for these programs, and also for hearing impaired persons, and also for moderate mentally handicapped persons, hostels for severely mentally handicapped persons, and also care and attention homes for severely disabled persons with effect from 2019-20. SWD will extend speech therapy services to these, and also it will roll out a pilot scheme in March of 2019 to set up district-based multidisciplinary professional teams to provide the service, and at the schools too, through the development of speech and also articulation, speech and communication, to provide the schools with this speech therapy service. I will stop here and listen to the deputations. Anything from the EDB, please? None. All right. In that case, I would like to give you the names of the administration representatives coming up. They are Mr. Casper Choi, Undersecretary for Labour and Welfare; Kok Chi Leung, Assistant Director for Social Welfare Department; Godwin Lai, Education Bureau Principal Assistant Secretary; and Ms. Louise Hui, Education Bureau Senior Specialist Speech Therapy. First of all, I would like to ask Civic Party, Mr. Kwok. The Labour Party, Mr. Kwok Wing Kin. The 2018 policy address mentioned the special service for SEN students, and in particular, there is mention of a position to be created, school-based, for school therapists. You would understand that the coordination work and also the resources allocation for co-use of speech therapists among schools is difficult. And it is said that there will be a cluster of 2 schools for co-using of 1 speech therapist. The problem is, do we have a target for 1 school, 1 speech therapist? Because, as you know, for 2 schools to co-use 1 speech therapist, not only would there be a limited number of cases that can be handled by the speech therapist, but also coordination will become a problem. And also, as you know, within the short period of time, it is difficult to have more in terms of supply of speech therapists. But demand is mounting, so the manpower demand, and also in terms of training students and professionals, is there a target of increasing the 100 that is turned out every year for speech therapists? And also under manpower, for 2 schools co-using 1 speech therapist, there is a dual-track mode for choice of the schools. That is, they can still buy the service, or through school-based speech therapist, they can, the school perhaps can choose between the 2. There are advantages and disadvantages for each of them. Some users say bought service can provide continuity of service, but school-based would be more appropriate for the special customized demand of the schools. Before there can be 1 school speech therapist for 1 school, can there be this dual track? A third point is about experience. How does the government look at the recognition of experience of the speech therapist and also make that commensurate with their remuneration? Because in the past, there had been more privately employed speech therapists. But how would that experience count towards the government post? And also for speech therapist service in general, a fourth point, we think that the government should monitor that even within the schools, how many people within the schools would have the knowledge to tell whether the school speech therapist is doing good work, and how can the government help the schools monitor this service and the quality of it? Civic Party, Community Development, Ms. For SLI, there had been more understanding of speech and language impairment in the recent times, and there had been more demand for speech therapists for children, students, and also for the elderly. The EDB does not have full understanding of the market, and also there are not enough graduates from speech therapy from the universities, and a lot of people who are in need of speech therapy will have to queue for a long time in order to get the service. As for SEN, special education need students, providing speech therapy for them, the government schools, primary and secondary, have been using the grants, that is the enhanced speech therapy grant and learning support grants, to meet the need. But this is not sufficient, and that adversely affect the recovery and the rehabilitation of such students, and also it adversely affects their learning environment and capabilities. It was mentioned that in 2019-2020 academic year, the mainstream schools will have school-based school therapists so that the schools can hire their own school speech therapists, even though this new service will allow SEN students to get earlier treatment and service. But actually, every year, locally graduated speech therapists' number is lagging, far lagging demand. School-based service will not be able to provide the needful student within the short to medium to long term. And for elderly service, 60% of the elderly in the residential elderly homes have swallowing issues. And in fact, there are a lot of successful cases of treatment, so that the elderly with the relevant service are able to swallow and also to have their quality of life improved. And there should be training one-on-one with speech therapists. And our party, for SEN students in particular, we have three proposals. First of all, the grant should be increased, and also increase the service of speech therapists, and also increase the proportion or ratio of speech therapists to SEN students at the schools. Mr. Wu Chi-kin, I would want to share a case that I've come across. A child with SLI, and he's 6 years old, but because of his situation or condition, he is still in K3 kindergarten, and he has been receiving school-based speech therapy service. Now, he's just turned 6, and when he just turned 6, the parent received a letter from the SWD, and it's not a birthday present, but a very scary letter. And the letter says the child is over 6 years of age, and therefore he is not eligible for subvention or the school-based service. And the parent went to the social worker. The social worker thought that the child should still be, is still needful of such service. And in the end, we do not know, and the SWD did not give any explanation, but after certain negotiations, the child was given the school-based service. But within the process, we saw that the 2.5 years old to 6 years old, that is children in the KG, should be given the service. And some of the SLI students may repeat kindergarten years. That is to say, the child would be over 6 years of age, but still the child is in kindergarten. And the SWD would still take take away the service. And some parents who are not in the know, their children will be at a loss as to this kind of support. Now, the child is in K3 now, and soon he will be going into primary. And the social worker who's been working with him suggested a particular primary school which had the school-based speech therapist. But on the other hand, this is not what the parents want, this school, but another more suitable school for the child. But that particular school said if your child has special education needs, the child will not be given an interview. And so the parent will have to forego this special education needs support. So for school-based speech therapy, can we consider the following? As you have mentioned in your paper, the dual track mode. Perhaps we can look at the elderly service, and that is the funding should follow where the person goes, and that is in funding or subsidizing the child in speech therapy service. Perhaps through application of the subsidy, the child can go to the school that they want to go to, rather than to create a burden or of that school. The child can still be able to get the speech therapy service and therefore really be integrated into the mainstream schools and to have the necessary learning environment. Well, thank you very much for sharing of the case, Mr. Wu. I'm sure you're helping the child, the family as well. Now, this child is over 6 years of age, so this is a loophole within the policy, but now there is a discretionary arrangement. Is that true? Yes, because we have followed up with the SWD, and when the SWD replied our letter, they said that policy-wise there's not much they can do. But after a month and a half or so, the service was reinstated for the child. The SWD did not reply us directly, and actually the parent didn't know why the service was reinstated for her child. So perhaps later on we will hear the answer from the administration. And next, mentally disabled aging concern group, Ms. Lee Xiangpei. I represent the mentally disabled and those with special needs. For the speech of the mentally disabled, there are 5 issues. 1, voice problems. Inaccurate articulation is a problem. The other is a range of tones, control of speech, and sometimes the volume would be overly high. And thirdly, communication, that is inability to express one's feelings. And fourthly, social skills. And fifth, swallowing problems, because for swallowing and the buccal cavity cannot coordinate well, and therefore the mentally disabled, starting from 40 years of age, when they start aging, speech also, the ability of speech would also decline because of the aging process. And this is worrying, and also it would affect them in 4 major ways.
First, the ability to make a living, because without speech, they will not be able to exercise different muscles, including that for the lungs, the chin, the lips, etc. Secondly, swallowing and chewing ability. Whether the food is in liquid or solid form, there will be difficulty for them to take in the nutrition from such food, so their health is affected. Number 3, there will also be emotional impact. If the impairment stays and then they cannot express themselves in language, their emotions will be suppressed. So they will express that in inappropriate behavior. And number 3, social communication. Since the language ability is impaired, when they get older, they actually will feel quite secluded from society. This is how the mentally retarded persons suffer if they also suffer from SLI. We like to have as early intervention as possible in the way of speech therapy. Next, Mr. Jorge Yin. Thank you. I am here because on the 11th of April 2019, Dr. Fernando Zheng spoke in the news. And this is because the speech therapy system is fraught with loopholes, and I can give you some information. Deafness and dumbness are related. Because we need to be able to hear, then our brain can interpret the message, and then we can use our mouth to respond to others. But in the news, I heard something that angered me very much. It is suspected that the Education Bureau forced an audiologist to change some reports. There was this 1.5-year-old infant who could not speak. First, let me come back to this issue first. You will understand that when we apply for an identification as a disabled person, or when we apply for speech therapy, we need a doctor's certificate, and therefore when you change an audiologist report, there will be serious impact on the child concerned. The relevant person should be guilty of forging a document that would attract imprisonment of 14 years as a maximum penalty. Let me quote from the website of iCare. Up till 2015, there were about 6,000 SLI children. But the service grant quota was limited. Some children had to wait 2 years. I am disabled. I am affected by autism. As Wu Chi-kin said, when I was 6 years old, I was still in kindergarten. I studied primary 1 when I was 7. So I echo what Mr. Wu Chi-kin said. And also, the targets for SLI therapy would only attend to 7 kinds of impairments. But if a child has to wait for 2 years, and just now, I was reading from Mr. Paul Chan's speech on the 28th of February 2018 in para 175. Paul Chan said that there would be $63 million for elderly service units for providing speech therapy for elderly people with SLI and swallowing difficulties. Where did you get those figures, FS? You talk about $63 million for rehabilitation services. I don't even know where the figures come from. And now I have this school-based speech therapy guideline with me. We did learn to read, write, listen, and speak in primary and secondary schools. And to quote from Mr. Wu Chi-kin, well, he talked about a child, and in fact, it was my experience as well. I repeated class in kindergarten for similar problems. Mr. Ho, sorry, your time is up, but we thank you very much for coming to speak to us at LegCo. You made one particularly pertinent point, and that is the waiting time, and you doubted the truthfulness of the figure. We'll wait for an answer from the administration, and we'll really thank you for coming. Next, Mr. Ko Chin Pang. Good morning. I am an election committee member of the healthcare sector. I heard that there were more resources for speech therapy and elderly services. I was so happy about it, but I am a speech therapist, and when I read the details of the policy, especially that with regard to SWD services, you have to have an auction amongst NGOs before you will get the funding, and I could not but heave a sigh. It's just like having markets in the community. People could be very happy about the provision of markets, but then only when they find out that these have been contracted out to link and sole contractors, they would have nothing to be happy about. Just look at our frontline speech therapists. We are also quite feeling helpless about this situation. Let me talk about this issue from the angle of the use of public funds. In February 2019, the Consumer Council did a survey. They interviewed rehabilitation services, and it was found that home care services could have price differences up to 1.4 times. And actually, if you have home care therapy, again, the price difference can be up to 4 times. So you can see that the SWD and NGOs are providing service at a much higher price than private organizations. So are we making the best use of public money? My question for the administration is, when you provide speech therapy service, have you done any analysis and comparison about the cost effectiveness of the service units? The Health Department is going for public-private participation, and the Education Bureau speech therapy subsidy was open for auction or tender by different people. Then why is the SWD so backward and restricted? I don't know whether you know about this. When NGOs win the contract, they will actually procure the service from outside. I myself am a second-tier contractor, so there is multi-layer contracting. Why do you allow this very duplicated system? Why do you allow money to be wasted in the administrative system? When you have the service, why don't you just open it to those who are price competitive? Why do you set this restriction at upfront? And then I'd like to talk about the remuneration of our colleagues. Some NGOs sign contracts with speech therapists for 1 year and 11 months. Why? Because then they don't have to pay the severance pay, and you will have a pay revision only every 1 year and 11 months, so your salary rise is delayed. And when a colleague has worked for 8 years, which is the median point salary, that colleague will not have any pay rise because the subsidy is only for median point salary. Right now, when you have the lump sum grant, this is allowed. And this is some kind of exploitation on speech therapists. Let us look across the room. We have the undersecretary, directors. Say, for example, today I implement a policy, your salary will be halved, and then in the future, your salary will only be increased up to the midpoint salary point, and I believe you will find that very frustrating as well. And in April 29, the SWD information shows that some NGO managers are having a salary of $2 million and more, and then they have cash allowance. But then if you are a junior, senior, or a junior speech therapist, you will still be paid the salary you deserve. But then when you have years of experience, you will not enjoy any pay rise. And then it is admitted by government officials that NGOs actually are sitting on some reserves now. Undersecretary, when you have the power to change the policy, why do you allow this to continue to happen? I'd like to ask you whether you have policies to make sure that speech therapists are reasonably paid. Thank you. Thank you very much. Your points are about multi-layer contracting within the profession. I hope the administration will address that in their response. Next, Ms. Poon. Morning. I'm a speech therapist. I represent the profession. I have been in the profession for 19 years. I have served NGOs, private organizations, as well as the hospital authority. I really appreciate that the administration is providing resources for speech therapy. But then, of course, resources are never enough. We will always want more resources for different areas of the service. And I'd like to talk about how the resources should be used. I now work in a private organization, and as Mr. Koh was saying, there is multi-level contracting. They ask us to make quotations, and then they ask us to procure the services they have contracted from the government. Well, I had the opportunity of having a closed-door meeting with the LW Bureau. I said I wanted to know why the money from SWD would always have this prerequisite, and that the tenders are only open to NGOs. I didn't know the answer, so I asked the question, and then it was said that this is because NGOs have a cross-disciplinary teams. And I asked whether they knew that private organizations also had that kind of teaming, but then they did not do their homework. And then without doing their homework, they have put in this prerequisite without knowing the entire picture. And so as a result, there is restriction on the part of the patients who have to use the service. So I'd like you to reflect on that kind of tendering system. Perhaps you can add a clause to the tender papers to make it sound so lofty, saying that this is only open to NGOs. But the actual effect is that you are keeping out private organizations in society which provide quality service. Why do you fear private organizations? It is because you have not sought an understanding into their services and their fee structure. And the Bureau also told us that the outreach service for elderly homes is a new service. This is because in October, November 2018, some NGOs contacted experienced private organizations because they did not know what is meant by institutional speech therapy. And then they wanted us to help them fill out the tender papers. They said that the deadline would be in December of that year, and in February 2019, the service would be launched. And then they asked us whether we could be their consultant, but then we would have to provide the service free of charge. And they said, why don't you help us fill out the tender documents first?
And then the LW Bureau staff said that in closed doors, they said that in fact there is choice. There is different tendering cases, and you will have the chance to have this kind of lottery to be able to win the contracts. But on the other hand, I'm sure there would be a lot of tenders. But on the other hand, do they really have the appropriate teaming? Do they not have subcontracting? And what is the ongoing monitoring and supervision? Well, the LW Bureau representative said that this is new service and they review this. But on the other hand, if we look at the over 10 years, the district speech therapy service and also the school-based rehabilitation service, in fact, there had not been any comparison of money worthiness or effectiveness, comparing the private organizations with the NGOs. And the Consumer Council perhaps can also help. That is, if the government doesn't do the kind of comparison, perhaps the Consumer Council can be asked to help. And now the government has certain reactions, and that is to say, when this is school-based, and there will be speech therapists who will not choose to stay behind because their past experience is not counted towards the school service. And how do you calculate that? And also, do you know about the overload situation of our colleagues? One colleague may be working over 5 days a week, serving 5 schools, but because this is the lowest bidder wins situation. And what can one do? Perhaps one can look at the actual hours of work provided, rather than to give a lump sum salary. Perhaps you should look into the situation. Seated here, all 3 of us represent the private sector, but we have not been consulted. Perhaps this is a reminder as to what to do. Have you also worked in the HA, Ms. Poon, at one point in your career? Yes, indeed. Yes, Mr. Lee Kam Sing. Yes, I have served the EDB and also the HA as a speech therapist. I have served for 21 years. I now work in the private sector. We've seen private-public cooperation, and we see the Kwai Ching District Health Center. It is also a private-public project. And also among private sector and relevant organizations, the school-based service had also been delivered. That goes to show the private and public cooperation is actually working. And further, with the bidding and tendering process, there will not be any black box operation. And also, you do not need to provide funding to the real estate companies, really, in rentals, in the tens of millions to rent the premises. And also, more than 1/3, an extra 1/3 of the needful people will be able to get the service. For elderly service, in the outreach residential care homes service and school-based service, as well as disabled service, there is a prerequisite, and that is the service provider will have to be a CAP 88 NGO. For all this kind of professional service, it can only be undertaken by NGO. This is intransparent, it is unjust, unfair, and it is making it impossible for private sector organizations to provide the service. Are you making NGOs in monopolies in Hong Kong for such services? What is the reason for setting up this kind of policy of the SWD? And is this against the competition ordinance of Hong Kong? And how is the SWD going to improve the tendering conditions for such services? I hope that in the future it will be more just and more transparent, and there will be no discrimination of private sector bidders. And also we advocate that all these subsidized services can be provided to the person, and that is, they should be portable for the individuals. Next, we have Ms. Tang Xiu-Chi of the Hong Kong Christian Services Chi Ngoi Parents Association. I have 2 children who are service users. One, when he was 2, he can only get 1 session of service every 2 months. The other is once every 1 month. And it is highly difficult, and I do not know what they get in terms of service, and the parents are concerned. In particular, we have 3 proposals. First, there should be long-term manpower planning for speech therapists, and there will be over 100 speech therapists to be hired for school-based service, and there will be 7,000 more of students who will need this service. There will have to be every year, according to the SWD estimate of speech therapy or speech therapist needs, there should be better coordination with the universities and the EDB. The 100 graduates per year is insufficient to have long-term planning for and also coordinating facilitation for the supply of speech therapists. That is important. Second proposal, the speech therapists, in terms of their remuneration and their grading, is already outdated. The need for in primary and secondary schools for speech therapy is increasing. Also within the HA, the demand is increasing. Every 100,000 persons, there is but 10 speech therapists. This is far lagging the advanced and developed countries. We want to have more speech therapists and also to enhance their quality and quantity. And thirdly, there should be a statutory registration of speech therapists, as in physiotherapists, but speech therapists, there is still no such system. There was a pilot scheme that was introduced last year, but on the other hand, there were only 200 registrants in the trade organization for speech therapists. And in order to supervise the profession and also to protect the rights of users and the people of Hong Kong, we want there to be a registration system for recognized speech therapists. Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Yes, the development of the profession and the registration system in Hong Kong, how should we go about it? That is what you have highlighted, and we appreciate that. Now, all the deputations, the individuals, the representatives from organizations have spoken. We will have the administration reply, and then we will open this up for Q&A. Perhaps we will need further information from the individuals or representatives of organizations later on. First of all, from the administration, please. Thank you, Chair. There had been a number of issues raised, so I will be clarifying on some points and responding to others. Mr. Wu mentioned just now that there are certain cases. The SWD, as you all know, in the service, we will be looking at cases, if necessary, with discretion. And in the past, we have enhanced certain services, especially for transition periods. For example, when children go into primary, the EDB, SWD, and also the HA on the IQ assessment, for example, of children, and also on their abilities assessment, we have been putting in special measures so that they are able to transition well into primary. The assessment reports, we would want these to be directly through the SWD or to the health department to be made available to the relevant primary school. So rather than to undergo a few tests, at the point of entry of the child into the school would already have that information concerning the student so that the student can integrate into school life as soon as possible. And also for children with special needs, we will be looking into the cases. If they are not ready to go into primary, we will make sure that there will not be any lag time for these children where they do not have schooling and or service. And just now it was mentioned that there is a new pilot scheme. In the paper, we have also mentioned that for any reviews of service, of the government, we are very clear that speech therapy should be stepped up. We also see the aging of the population and also aging disabled persons, and the need for speech therapy becomes more urgent. In the numbers and also in our past studies, we have the data on hand, especially for SEN students. We also see that their SLI is high in terms of incidence, 60% in fact. So in providing enhanced service or optimized service and regular service, and also in this year's outreach service, we have added resources in social workers as well as speech therapists. And we also not only assist the children or the students, but the parents as well in everyday caring and in skills, relevant skills for taking care of these children. A few of you have spoken just now about some new pilot or experimental schemes. For example, the professional outreach residential care home for persons with disabilities, and also the outreach program for residential care homes. And we have introduced these early in this year. And just now someone accused us of not having done the homework. That is not true. In designing the team for outreach, we have already consulted the professional associations, the universities, about the present situation. These two outreach programs, and deputations have mentioned, this is cross-professional teams, and the speech therapist is part of the team. And I would want to mention that in our past service, especially in ascertaining that the operating organization will be able to launch the program well, we would not go for tendering, but so there is no cost or expenses information that we require, but rather the experience in caring for the elderly at least 3 years, and also NGO experience in providing residential home with disabled elderly experience. And we have received a lot of these proposals from these organizations. And many of these organizations have cross-district, cross-professional service provision experience. And therefore, this round, we have invited only these NGOs because they have the experience. In the future, we would be very happy to hear the private sector. Perhaps there are some very specialized private sector organizations providing services to specific users or to some of the residential care homes, and we would want to listen to them. And this is rather comprehensive, this round, in terms of district and in terms of cross-profession service. And therefore, in this pilot scheme, because of the experience and implementation for this round, we have only involved the NGOs. But we do not rule out in the future for any new policies and measures. We will continue to review our implementation. Now, this is a new pilot scheme launched in February or March, and the head of SWD had gone to the districts to look at how the actual implementation is. And in the past few years for speech therapist service, we see that some speech therapists do not have full-time work.
And now they know that we place emphasis on the development of speech therapy, and we'll be reviewing the manpower level. According to our present plan, we cannot see any manpower shortage at the moment, but we'll continue to keep watch. We know that there has been a tight supply, and when you roll out services, you have to make sure that there are people filling the posts, and that is why we are increasing services in phases, and to make sure that there will be newly trained speech therapists in the pipeline. I can see that some of you here have been in the sector for over 10, 20 years, and I would be very happy to listen to you as to how we can take this forward. Chairman, I think you agree with me that our consideration is to enhance the service. If we can communicate with other professions, I think that will be important. Perhaps I should leave some time for the Education Department to say something. Thank you. Thank you. On the front of education, starting from 2019-20, we are rolling out the enhanced speech therapy service or grant in 3 years, and there will be school-based service. The speech therapists would actually be resident in schools, and they will form a team together with other school management in order to prevent, cure, and also develop speech therapy. Since the therapist will be one of the staff at school, there will be more stable, continuous, and intensive cooperation within the same staff, so there would be better service to the students. Given the present operation, we are rolling out the service in 3 years. Usually, there are 2 schools which will form clusters, and between schools, there will be cooperation. Usually, there will be a school with more students and then another with fewer students. Then it will be easier for them to deploy the necessary manpower. In the past, we have been giving grants, but now we have school-based speech therapists. In terms of recognition of work experience, we are following previous practices, but we also know that some therapists have been providing school-based therapy using the Education Department's grant. We are going to give recognition for that experience, but then the applicants will have to provide sufficient and valid proof to the school and the Education Bureau in order to confirm their salary level. And in the process, we will be looking at the effectiveness, and we will have regard to how schools manage their staff. But then we also have speech therapists within the Education Bureau who will go to schools to give advice. We have also issued a guideline to schools so the professionals can help the children. We'll have sharing sessions on best practices. We'll also hold thematic talks and workshops to help coordinate between ST and SENCO, the SEN coordinating teachers. And we will be watching how this rolls out in the 3 years. Now, Mr. Ho mentioned the hearing aid issue. Well, we have looked into the issue and we have found that nothing of that sort happened. We encourage students to use hearing aid no matter what level of hearing impairment they suffer from. Thank you. Just like to clarify one point. You talk about SPST and qualification recognition. I'd like to know whether this is a recent adjustment. Yes. On several occasions, actually when we talk to legislators and the profession, we were asked to see how we could clarify experience recognition. And now there are forms that applicants can fill out, and so they can communicate with schools more effectively. Okay, I can see many members who have raised their hands. First round, Poon Siu Ping, Claudia Mo, Ted Hui, Ip Kin Yun, Fernando Zhang, and Lo Wai Kwok. 4 minutes, including a reply. Mr. Poon Siu Ping. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the deputations and individuals for coming. Today we are discussing the provision of speech therapy services for elderly persons, persons with disabilities, and students with special needs. Just now the Bureau responded to several points made, but I'd like to follow up on other points. It was mentioned that in October 2018, you increased resources, and in 2019, you are going to start a pilot and there will be more resources. My question is, well, you say in March 2019, you are going to have more resources to improve home care service and also district support centers. I'd like to know how these initiatives differ and what kind of resources are we talking about? And also, deputations commented on the statutory licensing scheme and also long-term manpower complement. The Bureau said they cannot see any manpower shortage. And then the Education Bureau will launch the enhanced speech therapy service requiring 100 SBSTs. I'd like to ask you whether you have done your analysis that you really have enough manpower to launch all these initiatives. And what about the remuneration package for people working in different units? It was said that some people only have work contracts for up to 1 year and 11 months. Now, if they do not enjoy a stable prospect, I'm sure the service can be affected. Can I please have responses to those points? Undersec. Well, we have some pilots, including outreach services at private hospitals and also elderly homes. In terms of elderly services, the service was not present in subsidized or private elderly homes up to now. And then we know that it is important for elderly people to have speech therapy service. The important thing is sometimes elderly people have swallowing difficulties and the food can go into the air duct and they will suffer from complications. Therefore, we know the importance of providing ST in elderly homes. The main difference is that we did not have it, now we have it, and then we are sending outreach teams to all elderly homes. And we have assessed the manpower level. As I said, in the past years, STs were telling us that some of them did not have a job. But now, we place emphasis on the service and development of STs, and then we also have a plan to enhance demand. So when we roll out this new program, we can see that we have enough manpower, and then there will be graduates turning out from universities every year. And we'd like to implement the pilot in a phased manner. And we'll be increasing the jobs by 100 or so every year. But we will be keeping watch on the manpower supply and demand situation. We also mentioned that we allow the organizations flexibility in hiring people. If they need a lot of people, well, still the remuneration should not be a problem. So I like to give that kind of brief reply first. Thank you. Next, Ms. Claudia Mo. Thank you, Chair. Let us look at the queue of students waiting for this service. There are a few thousand of them. And of course, this is the responsibility of the LWB and Education Bureau. But since this has a medical side to it, I think the FH Bureau should also be involved Just now, it was said that if a review has to be done, well, the Consumer Council did it, and so you can see that the administration is only half-hearted about this. They will just tackle symptoms when they appear. Well, I don't think they are really very uncaring, but I would say they are just half-hearted, and I still think that that is undesirable. I don't think you have geared up for providing the service. At least we don't have a licensing system. And now, of course, we know we have this accredited registers scheme for healthcare professions. But can't you be more targeted and professional? 3 universities are training STs, but if they are not given professional qualification, you will see there will be a problem in the provision of service. So first of all, can you improve this side of the issue? And that is, we have a proper and formal system for providing the service. And secondly, the fact is there is a long queue. And I'm not talking about the elderly needs. I'm only addressing the needs of school children. What can you do to shorten the queue? Undersecretary. Thank you, Chair. I said just now, we know there is the need. We have talked to carers, parents, and we have also contacted SLI children. I said we are going to improve the interface with primary school. Parents told us that they should not have to go to different departments and there should be one-stop service. If children can be assessed and served by the hospital authority or the SWD from very young, parents will not have to go through a protracted process for getting the service. And if children are cared for from primary school, then the information will stay there and until they grow up. Talking about rehabilitation, there are more and more aged rehabilitated persons, and we need to provide more ST service. They need the service for communication, and when people get old, they also suffer from swallowing difficulties. And talking about preschool service, we have formalized the service, and come October, the quota will be increased to 7,000. And we hope to increase that by another 1,000 later. We hope that there will be no queues for preschool service. And also, when we seek to regularize any service, we understand that there is a high proportion of people suffering from SLI, and that is why we have increased the services of social workers and STs. When we roll out new programs, including the service at elderly homes and homes for the disabled, we look at it as a package. While we implement the program, we'll be keeping watch on manpower, on implementation, and maybe you will ask us to increase the service. This is how we will hope to optimize the service. I think I should stop here. Well, I was talking about a proper regular licensing system. Yes, Ms. Claudia Mo asked about this, and the deputations also quoted a figure.
This may not be within the policy realm, but on the other hand, when we have more of these pilot schemes and we see that in Hong Kong there is no comprehensive development policy for speech therapists, and does the government understand the profession? Because after all, this is a profession, and if there is more resources, adding more manpower, but have we also thought about the overall development of the profession? For example, the accredited registration system, etc. Yes, we have heard all those views, and we will reflect this to the relevant departments. Well, first of all, I would like to thank the deputations for coming up to let your voices be heard. And I'm looking at the paper. I see that the government has a direction of putting more resources into speech therapy in elderly service and in the schools, etc. And this is correct. And with all these measures being launched, there are certain details that are problematic, and I'm concerned whether this would affect the final quality of service that people actually get. There are certain questions which are left unanswered. For example, in the social welfare area, why is it that only charitable NGOs are qualified to participate and not private organizations? I cannot see the logic there. I'm not saying that only, or private organizations would be better. But on the other hand, we know that they have been providing the service. The experienced speech therapists are there. Now, as for the charitable NGOs, if they take up the work, would it be a problem that they lack experienced speech therapists and the quality of service might therefore be affected? I'm concerned. As for schools, again, there are certain new measures. The original intention on the part of the government is good, that this is school-based and the schools can hire their own speech therapists. But on the other hand, it changes the ecology of the profession. And I wonder how many private speech therapists would serve the schools under this new remuneration and system, and therefore how many experienced school speech therapists would be willing to serve the school. I don't have the responsibility to voice on behalf of the profession, but I am thinking for the users. Can the government commit to no or at least at par, standards of service to be delivered at least at par with what it is now? Well, thank you. Actually, I think we are all concerned about the users, SEN students, disabled, elderly, and from our point of view, it is to provide the best service. So be assured that not only will the service be of the same quality, but we want it to be enhanced in terms of standards and quality. That is our stance and our consideration. Now, as for the charitable NGOs and their participation, I've already explained that, and that is they are cross-district and cross-residential home service involved, and the NGOs are more experienced in cross-profession, cross-district service. And in the future, we will not rule out possibilities. We will be understanding from the profession as to the delivery of service. Well, thank you. For the schools, we would want there to be an enhanced standard of service for students in the schools in terms of frequency and more. As for the speech therapists, working in the school is going to be helpful, and we are definitely concerned about quality. We commit to members that through the schools and EDB colleagues and other professionals, we will closely monitor and regularly review the service and, where necessary, make changes. Chair, having heard the answer, I still am not confident that this will allow the experienced speech therapists to stay behind and serve the users. Chair, yes, we will commit to providing quality service of relevant standard. Right. Just now we were talking about the concern about registration of speech therapists. But on the other hand, while we do see some adjustments on the part of the government, but it is not entirely focused. So we will have to continue with our efforts. Yip Kim Yum, first of all, thank you for coming up to the lecture to tell us about the real situation. We have learned a lot, and in the past period of time, we see the government putting in more resources into speech therapy, and this is a good thing. But the issue is speech therapy, apart from putting in more resources, how can we ascertain the quality of the service? That is important. Just now, the Undersecretary had spoken about quality as well. And some of the deputations coming up today have talked about the accreditation and registration of speech therapists and the supervision of the profession. And we have found that for speech therapists, the management of professionalism, I would think, we are still in an early stage of so doing. In the past, there was one university for training and nurturing speech therapists, and we were confident about the quality. But now we know that there are other universities and overseas returnees producing speech therapists. And how can we be sure that the quality of training is up to standard and the service is up to standard? This is all about management of professional quality. And we have to do this early, because if you need a structure for professional management and accreditation, you have to do it as early as possible. And if you leave it to a late stage, then you would already be looking at a big group of professionals of different qualifications or standards of practice, and that is not good. Hong Kong had been successful in the past because we have such very good systems. And if we do not develop these systems in time, then even if you allocate a lot more resources, there will be no assurance of quality. Now, just now, we've talked about private-public cooperation. And if you do not have this accreditation qualification system, you still would not know what the efficacy is and who's qualified. And I hope the administration will not just hear this, but to look into this cross-department and bureau to early on set up this qualification system. Just now I heard Mr. Wu Chi-kin mentioning two cases. I would like to have the administration respond to that. First of all, concerning the 6-year-old, the 6-year-old is still in kindergarten but is denied of school-based service. Is that the policy, please? I would believe that this should not be the case. Can you very clearly tell the public that what the policy is? Secondly, Mr. Wu Chi-kin had said that certain schools, because of students with special education needs, the school said that they would not provide interview opportunities. I do not know whether this is a government school or a private school, and if that is the case, would this contravene certain rules? For example, would this smack of discrimination? Yes, the EDB will supplement on the school situation. Now, just now, I have mentioned that the service we provide now is preschool, that is pre-primary school. But at the same time, we look at it case by case. If there is a need, we would not, because a student has not gone into primary school yet, we would not consider serving the case. Just now, we hear of a case which is a child who is over 6 years old and not in primary school yet, and So we would want to assure parents not to be overly concerned or worried about this. May I clarify, are you saying that the child would be transitioned through from kindergarten to primary? As long as the kindergarten is still in kindergarten, he or she will still have the service and all the way through to the primary and not get that birthday present of a letter. Well, this is preschool service, but there are special needs for certain children. Perhaps they have to repeat K3, etc. And therefore, in the procedures of the SWD, where there are special cases, we will look at it on a case-by-case basis. So you're saying case-by-case why would that be case by case if this is a continued service? Well, we'll look at the actual situation. Perhaps the EDB can supplement. Thank you, Chair. For under discrimination of disabled ordinance, it is very clear that schools cannot refuse service or entrance into the school because of SEN needs of the student. Perhaps there are some misunderstanding. If the parent has any queries, they are very welcome to approach EDB. And I know that the schools would abide by this requirement generally. Yes, as a remark, Mr. Hu Chi-kin had brought 2 cases to this deputation, and this is very good. There are these loopholes, the repeaters of kindergarten K3 over 6 years of age, and we know that 6 years of age is where the EDB and SWD has this line of demarcation, and there are some cases which fall through the loophole because the 2 departments cannot overlap in their service. Now, if the parent did not seek help, then the child would fall through in the loophole. So if this is a case-by-case basis, well, the case will have to come voluntarily to the department. I think we should pay more attention there in the future. Now, Chair, in terms of the coordination, we should avoid cases or parents falling into or children falling into the situation where before accessing primary, the case actually falls through. We will follow up with that. Dr. Fernando Zhang. Well, I have also received cases, as Mr. Yip Kin Yun had mentioned. Yes, once a child turns 6, service is denied them. And that is not right. And when we talk to the SWD, they say that, they will be given service, but that's only a commitment done verbally. But actually, service stops at 6 years of age, wherever the child is. And then I heard you saying case by case. So those who know how to fight for their rights will come to you. And then after looking at the case, it will be reinstated, the service maybe. And this is completely silly because the child has that need, preschool, and your scheme is a preschool scheme. Why don't you automatically provide the service if the child is not in school, primary school yet? Why does it have to be case by case? What more do you need to determine that? Perhaps Mr. Koch from the SWD can supplement. Right. Chair, for the service, for preschool service, when the child is close to primary school, at the kindergarten, there will still be this preschool rehabilitation service. Now, if the child is over 6 years of age and is repeating K3, well, at present, the policy is to stop service at the child turning 6 years of age. And we do see cases with this need to extend beyond that. So as mentioned, we will look at the cases of the students to continue the service. On what case situation?
The child is in preschool stage. The child may be around 6 years old, And as long as he is preschool, you should not just stop the service. The child will still be at that stage and the child is still receiving the service. Why do you just draw a line at 6 years old? What else do you have to look at in order to decide whether to continue the service? What will you be looking at? If the child needs the service, we'll continue to provide it. But we'll have to see whether the child is in primary school. If he is, then the school will provide the service. As I was saying, we are already thinking about interfacing with primary school. Please do not beat about the bush. Say it to all Hong Kong people here. Give the undertaking that the on-site preschool rehabilitation service will not be withdrawn as long as the child has not entered primary school. Can you promise that? Chairman, I have already talked about our present arrangement. I will continue to review our service to do it better. Well, your present arrangement is unreasonable. Why do you stop the service when the child turns 6? And then when people need the service, they have to come back and apply to you. What other criteria do you look at? Well, Chairman, I said if there is a need, we'll continue with the service. What do you mean by if there is a need? The child is receiving the service. The child has been assessed to be in need of the service. But then when the child turns 6, you will just say the child doesn't need the service anymore. What kind of profession are we talking about, Undersecretary? Chairman, I said, usually when they turn 6, they will go into primary school. But we understand that there are isolated cases where the child is not in primary school. What do you mean by having your discretion? What kind of discretion can you enjoy? If a child is in kindergarten when he is 6 years old, well, talking about the present arrangement, they can still enjoy the service, so there will not be more supplement. Well, you can't blame Mr. Fernando Zhang for feeling worked up because this is your policy. You are segregating the service by age. On a certain night, you are still 5 years old, you have the service, and then the next day you are 6 and you don't have the service anymore. Now, I must admit that it is very seldom we have a joint meeting between education and welfare services, and the 2 bureaus or departments will be able to pass the buck. But now both of you are here, and perhaps you should not say it is about discretion, and I believe there will not be a big number of such cases. Undersecretary, can you supplement by saying that you plan to do it better? Because if, as you said, I would still be worried. Let's say out of 10 children will be in primary, but then there will be the odd one out, which will need the service. As I said, if there is a need, we'll continue with the service. And we will not be passing the buck between the bureaus. If the child is still not in primary and he needs the service, we will continue with it. Dr. Fernando Zhang, you can follow up in another round. Well, I have to follow up. What do you mean by whether the child is in need? I think that is outrageous. Of course he is in need. Otherwise, why will he be receiving the service? Well, I think I have already responded. And as Dr. Zhang was saying, if the child is in need, we'll continue with the service. So I don't know why the member is still unhappy. Dr. Zhang, please use your second round. Maybe he doesn't understand me, Chairman. Please, you can teach him to speak Cantonese. Maybe he doesn't understand Cantonese. Well, I can hear that you have asked the question clearly. Then perhaps when you have a second round, maybe the Undersecretary can give you a more specific answer. I believe the keywords are need and discretion. Next, Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Chairman, I was not in the meeting room, but I was listening in to the views of the deputations and individuals when they spoke. I really thank them for coming, and including concerned groups, professionals, and also service recipients. Thank you very much for coming. I don't want to repeat the questions, but I have heard other members And they were talking about this line being drawn at 6 years of age. And I have heard your responses, and I am also very angry about it. The child is still in K3, for example, and he turns 6, but you stop the service and ask people to reapply. Well, of course, there is a need. Now, of course, if you say a child turns 6 and he eats a piece of birthday cake and suddenly he is well and okay, then of course you can stop the service. But then even when a child turns 6, but then he still needs the service as long as he is in kindergarten, then you should continue with it. Should I understand what you said to be so? If that's the case, I would be happy for those children. And talking about speech therapy for the elderly, PWDs, and students, these groups differ in their need for ST, and you must give different consideration to their needs. Hong Kong people are living longer, and there will be a larger proportion of our population being aged people. When people grow old, they suffer from dementia, and they will need speech therapy and other services. I can imagine the need for this will grow. My first question is, have you done any meaningful estimate of the need? You will need hardware, software, and professionals when you need to provide the service, and you can't just wait until the problem becomes imminent. And secondly, for children, the key point is early identification and intervention. You must do so when the child is still an infant, that is before they enter kindergarten. So you can provide the service. You must identify the problem at an early stage. As you know, the earlier you identify the problem, the earlier you provide the service, the better the chance for cure. So that's important. Thank you, Chair. For children of SEN, well, as you know, I have a child myself. When they are born, they are taken to maternity and childcare homes, and tests will be done on babies, and therefore there are channels for babies to be given the tests. We are in contact with parents' groups. We understand that the crucial stage is from 0 to 6 years. We know that the earlier we can identify the problem, the earlier we can provide the service, the better it is for their development. Therefore, in our service plan, we have the on-site preschool service. We are increasing the quota to 7,000, and this includes ST. We are going to increase the quota in the next 5 years. And then there are 2 other pilots, outreaching service to private homes and also elderly homes. You can see we are going to cover all elderly homes. The target is for elderly people who require the service because of swallowing difficulties. That is why we have this pilot to cover all homes, meaning 50,000 odd places, and over 40,000 of the inmates will benefit from the service. So the objective is to provide outreach service if the homes tell us they have the need. If we need to enhance the service, we will keep that under review and consider it. As for interface between pre-kindergarten and kindergarten children, I said we could consider relieving the parents of their pain. We know that children at 6 would be in primary school, but then if there are children who aren't, we can go back and review the process. Can I please add, Chairman? It is not strange for children with special needs to still be in kindergarten when they turn 6. And just make it simple. Just continue with the service automatically without asking the parents to reapply. I don't think this will require a lot of social resources. Why don't you just say you will do it? And secondly, I was asking about your assessment of the need of the elderly, and I haven't heard an answer, but I hope that you will provide better service once you are rolling out these pilots. Next, Mr. Leung Yu-chung. Thank you, Chair. I'd like to thank the deputations and individuals for coming today. The administration is saying that they are stepping up ST service. Of course, no one would object. But we have heard different problems. Can you have the right level of manpower to respond to the need in society? Right now, we only have 10 STs for every 100,000 population. And the level should be 40 to 45 STs for every 100,000 population. Of course, we won't object if you provide more training places. But then the thing is, will you still have enough STs to fill the posts if you provide more service? And secondly, you are stopping the service at 6. Can I ask the deputations and individuals, have you seen any cases where children do not need the service anymore once they turn 6? Or is it that the children are still in need of the service for a very long time after they turn 6? Now, if that's the case, why is the administration stopping the service at 6? You need the service for primary and secondary schools. Now, of course, not everyone needs the service up until secondary schools. Some can have the service stopped somewhere along the road, but then there are others who will continue to need the service. So you should seek to give adequate care to children, and you should not be picky as to who needs the service. And as a colleague asked, how do you judge whether someone needs the service? How do you make your assessment? You drew the line at 6, maybe because you did not have manpower or resources available. But now, the situation is much better. And you should exempt the children and parents, even if the children turn 6, and just continue with the service. If you are providing the service in primary and secondary school anyway, then why put in this hurdle? Can I please ask the deputations and individuals, how long do people usually need the service? First, Ms. Lee Pui Chung. Well, I am Lee Chung Pui. Sorry. I'd like to mention 2 points in response. My child is in his teens. He suffers from SLI and autism. He was in a special kindergarten and he was in need of ST, but now he is 17. He is in a special school and he still requires ST. And even when he becomes an adult, he will still need the service. So you ask me for how long these people need ST. Well, they are in great need. And also the pilot of outreach services. I thank you very much for starting the service, but many service users do not know about the service.
We hope that this pilot scheme can be publicized among the users so that at least the mentally disabled and their family would know of this new service so that they can be assured, because very often they do not have the information. Now, 30 seconds for Mr. Ko to respond, because this is the time that is allocated to Leung Yu-chung. Well, thank you. As a speech therapist, it is true that at any stage or age, a case can end because the person no longer needs the service. For autism or certain mental disabled persons, their need would be longer term. So it depends on the case, how serious it is, and not the age. Then why not cancel, take away this 6 years of age hindrance? Well, Chair, allow me to respond. Whether we provide service or not does not depend on the age of the person concerned. As mentioned just now, if there is a need for the service, then the service will continue for him or her. But as for how the process can be optimized, as I've mentioned many times, one of the things we are strengthening is a coordination between kindergarten and primary. If this is a gap where certain users can fall through the cracks, well, first of all, I'm assured that they would not fall through the crack. They will be continued with service provision. Now, before primary, they are given the service, and after going into primary, the EDB also provides the service. And the paper also says that preschool and after going into primary, there will be enhanced service. It is not the case that they will be not given service after going into primary school. EDB, please. For preschool children, we have sufficient information. For example, in the assessment centers, the assessment results, we have that information, and the OPRS and other centers of the SWD, we have progress reports of these children as well. And we provide these to the team, and including the speech therapist and the primary school teachers. As for the severity of the case, we will look into this to plan the service provided to the children concerned. And after going into primary, we will continue to monitor the progress of the student. And also in terms of prevention and also in pedagogy, how there can be further speech therapy elements incorporated so as to help the child along. That is looked at as well. And also the procedure. We will go back and review the procedure. All right, we have the next round of members who would want to speak. But before that, perhaps I will ask my first round of questions. Today, as I've mentioned just now, at the beginning of the meeting, it is rare that we have a special meeting and a joint meeting at that for speech therapy. And on the one hand, the government has the resources to allocate to elderly residential homes, and also at the school, there is the school-based speech therapist. Now, today at the deputations, we heard professionals coming up to tell us that there is subcontracting situation. I do not know whether the administration knows of this situation and whether there is any room for improvement. That is to say, at the resource allocation, the NGOs can bid for the contract. And after that, they will have to put together a cross-profession team that would include physiotherapy, speech therapy, etc. And what they do is to go look for the speech therapists. And because they have to put together these teams to this alliance, and at the end of the day, they go back to the same speech therapist. And Mr. Ko Chin Pang mentioned just now that there is subcontracting cases. That is to say, we would want the profession to mature as a profession. We talked about accreditation, registration system, etc. just now. My question to the administration is, do you have any supervision and do you know of subcontracting? That is to say, I use $4 to fund the 4 different services. And in between, there's a lot of administration costs or considerations, etc. And finally, who wins the bid? It is the big charitable NGO. But I'm concerned or worried that it is possible they are still going to the same service providers to provide the service through subcontracting. Well, we do not look at who is the cheapest in our tendering exercise. Cheapest may not be ideal. We want to balance the efficiency and also, most importantly, the quality of service of the operator. So the operator, in giving us their proposals, we want to see that in the proposals that the operators can be able to very effectively allocate their resources. Now, it is a cross-profession team. There will be clinical psychologists, nurses, there will be occupational therapists, physiotherapists, etc. And you can see that the team is varied. And even for private companies, not all private companies would in-house have all these different professions. But as I've mentioned earlier, for this pilot scheme, when rolling it out, we have consulted the professions. And we know that from the past, if we have to provide residential home service in the district, there may be a few hundred of these residential homes. So therefore, we need experienced operators. And also, we want focus. That is, professionals such as CPs, clinical psychologists, nurses, etc., speech therapists, etc. And they will have to look for these professions and in the market. And we will definitely review the situation. In fact, we have just launched this program a few months ago. We will look at the service delivery, allocation of manpower resources, and the other factors as well. I will use the power vested to the chair to extend this meeting by 15 minutes. Dr. Kwok Ka-ki, I would like to thank the deputations for coming up. I have a question for the government. Speech therapy and all the other professional services, there is a requirement for quality and standards. If you say that you put just any person in a position just to make the numbers, that would not be right. Now, if you say you want to find experienced therapists, especially speech therapists, to provide the service, then the government should have a method to tell apart what the service should be. Let me give you an example. A fresh graduate speech therapist, the clinical experience may not be rich for this person, and the organizations use a very low salary to hire this person, and through subcontracting and further subcontracting, the graduate is working at a very low income. And that compared to very experienced speech therapists in treating autistic persons or special education need, SLI students, or elderly with swallowing problems. These are very complicated professional service. When the government is providing this, because the paper is so simplistic, and I really do not see from the paper what the assessment is. That is, assessing the SEN or the disabled persons as to their needs. Can you tell us a little bit more as to how you go about it? Well, I've talked to some of the speech therapists, Chair. Their relevant training includes, as I've mentioned, swallowing problems, SLI problems, etc. And for many of them, in certain services, they are more experienced. For example, they're more experienced with elderly or disabled or SEN. Then in that area, they would be more experienced. But as I've mentioned just now, in terms of hiring, in the past, we have been doing the following. For example, at the EDB, they have employed speech therapist service. Perhaps the EDB can supplement. Right. Chair, for special schools, they employ speech therapists, and for ordinary schools coming, they will be doing so as well. In our sharing sessions, we have told the schools that on the one hand, they will have to look at the applicants' academic qualifications, and there will have to be proof. For example, if the person is not a graduate from a local university, they'll have to look at that as well. So that's basic information for us. And also their proof of experience or work experience in different organizations, the number of years, what kind of target patients, etc. And further, because in the school, they'll be serving the students. And if they can provide supplemental information on SLI service, for example, this person have had experience in other schools with this kind of providing this kind of service, then with all this information, there will be a decision as to whom or which speech therapist to hire. You haven't answered my question, actually. For government procurement, we know that you consider cost the lowest price, and then the professional service need. Let's say there's a teacher who is to help these students. One is a fresh graduate. The other is a teacher with 20 years of serving SEN. Whom would you choose? Well, of course, I would choose the best for my students within my capabilities, of course. Now, if you buy a speech therapy service, you do not want there to be subcontracting and further subcontracting of a contract, but you would be very anxious to know what kind of quality of service they can provide. I mean, if you just want verbiage as to, experience in speech therapy, of course, everybody can provide you with that. But how about assessment or comments from parents on this organization or person in the service rendered? That is important. How do you look into this? Otherwise, you're just filling the ranks. Well, this is not the tendering is not a lowest bid win situation. We look for the best service proposal. And also in the proposal, they will have to comply with the minimum requirement on service standards that we request. As for how the service can be enhanced, this is one of the things that we will be reviewing in this pilot program. And it is not just about speech therapy. In this program, there are other professions involved as well. So we'll take the opportunity to look into the service when it is rolled out. On the one hand, there is a standard reached, and also to further enhance the professional standard. Why do you have to go through an NGO? I still don't understand. Well, I've answered that earlier. Before we launched this program, we have talked to different professional bodies, and it is not just limited to speech therapists. In the private sector, when I talked to them earlier on, it is not that too many of the private organizations would have the experience for cross residential homes cross-district service. So in the past, the
計劃嘅時候呢，
Therefore, in this pilot, we will first seek proposals from experienced NGOs. As I said, in these two pilots, we'll require NGOs to have at least 3 years experience working with SWDs and also or PWDs and also elderly people. When we talk to stakeholders in the profession, we would try to find out what happens after the pilot. We are not only looking for cheap service, but we are looking at enhancing the service level. So we're all ears to providing more choices. In the second round, we have Claudia Mo, Ip Kin Yun, and Fernando Zheng. And then I'll leave some time for the deputations and individuals at the end. So 3 minutes each. Claudia. Many people might have the misconception that ST is not really a serious matter because after all, you are not bedridden, you don't suffer from pain. However, this is a service that the administration must provide to the people. It is a duty on the part of the administration. Please don't think that this is some kind of benefit you are giving people. If a child suffers from autism, then he is in need of the service. And even if people don't suffer from congenital impairment, you can imagine if someone can't speak properly, that person is affected his entire life. Now, he cannot work in the mass media, public relations, politics, broadcasting. There is no way you can take up such a job. So please don't misunderstand this to be a very unimportant thing. In fact, it will put pressure on the person's life throughout his lifetime. I am not being difficult, but you said that the line is drawn at 6 even if it is not a dead line. I'm not splitting hairs with you. I'm not saying that someone should recover just because he sings his birthday song at 6 years. But I believe you must have certain medical data to back you up. And there must have been studies or research projects telling you that you can draw the line there. And you mentioned the word discretion. I grant you that you did not pick your words easily. Well, if there is a need, you have to provide the service. You shouldn't have any discretion. This is not welfare. This is not benefit. This is your duty towards taxpayers. So I'm really asking you, why did you draw the line at 6? What is the origin of such a policy? Chairman, as I said, usually children go to primary school at 6. As we said in the paper, children will have the services in school. But as I said, as long as there is the need, well, Chairman, if he is not backed up by medical data, then he can remain quiet. If there is an SEN child, he can be 10 years old and be still in kindergarten. I was trying to make it easy for you, to give you the floor for another answer. But then you are really telling me that you are just picking this out of thin air. So I'm wasting my breath with you. Now, as I was saying, and also the Education Department also said that the service is available when children go to primary schools. So I have to state clearly, as long as the child needs it, he will have the service both at the preschool stage and also in school. But of course, we have heard from this public hearing that we should go back and think about providing better interface. We'll try to do it better. Mr. Ip Kin Yun, second round. Chairman, the Undersecretary has actually stated his case clearly. 6 years of age is just an administrative arrangement. It is not dictated by professional care or the needs of the student. You just say that you need to review the service when the child turns 6, but then the child is paying a high price for this. The child may not be in primary yet when he turns 6, and it may just be a few months away. And then the Undersecretary said, if there is the need, you will continue with the service, but then you have to find out whether it has the need. First, you have to send an information note to the child, and the parent will have to come back to tell you the child is in need, and then you will have to vet the application, and then you resume the service. And then by then, the child is already in primary. This gap of service is unnecessary because you take time to resume the service. Well, you are talking about having better interface between kindergarten and primary, but then there is already a gap within the kindergarten years. And you said you would apply discretion when a case comes before you, but I think members are telling you that your discretion should be for continuation of the service beyond 6 years of age. You don't need a process to do it. You just scrap the process and just continue with the service. And in fact, you have less work to do that way. For members here, we think that is a win-win solution. Members have this very strong view expressed today. Undersecretary, I hope you have heard us that we have this very strong view. Please go back and consider it and then give us a written reply. Let the two panels know whether you will streamline the process or even better scrap it. So there will be continuous service for the children. I know you want to work for the welfare of children, so just take this extra step. It won't be difficult, will it? Whether members express strong views or not, I have heard you. And as I said, we shouldn't make it difficult for the service to be resumed. I was only telling you what is being done now, and I already said many times that we would go back and take another look how we can have a smoother transition. We'll certainly update members of progress. Thank you. Dr. Fernando Zhang and then KK Kwok. Chairman, this hearing should not be about this, but I don't know why the Undersecretary is still talking about interface. What interface? You call that an interface at the age of 6? That child is still in preschool stage. He has yet to finish the preschool stage, and you are talking about interface. What interface are you talking about? Where do we need an interface? Can you explain to me what kind of interface you are talking about? Well, Chairman, let us not haggle over terminology. We are talking about primary and preschool. No, you may have an interface between preschool and primary, but we are talking about children who turn 6 before they go to primary school. We have already said that if there is a need, we'll continue with the service. Why do you still want to vet whether there is a need? Of course, the child needs it. Well, let us not argue about this. I have heard from many members speaking from the perspective of the user, parents, and carers. We have heard you. We'll go back and review the process to see how we can further smoothen it. Well, let us have a reply next time. I don't want to waste more time here. This is such a simple matter. You don't call this rehabilitation service up to 6 years. You call it preschool rehabilitation service. So as long as the child is still in the preschool stage, you have to provide the service. And in the primary school stage, of course, we also see many gaps. But in fact, there are many serious gaps, because a lot of preschool rehabilitation service stops at the primary school stage. And ST may be an exception now that you have this new arrangement. And I'm talking about occupational therapy. And the child may have been provided with certain facilities in the preschool stage, but then the facility will not be available in primary school. Therefore, many parents are complaining that there is a big gap of service when children go to primary school. But today we are talking about new services for ST, whether it is under the LWB, meaning in institutions, or the OPRS, and the SBST run by the Education Bureau. The biggest problem is the way the service is provided. Should it be NGOs who have had the experience, and then in fact the NGOs may win the tender and then they just contract it out to other service providers? So I'll make it simple. They are not well prepared. I think it is worth a while to make it flexible, diversified, and then for us to take a look at all the different modes of service provision. Should it be by a dual track approach, or should the SWD be contracting out the service? I believe we should review the different modes of service. I think right now things are too calcified and the service is affected because NGOs will just pay the lowest salary. Experienced STs cannot continue to provide the service. Thank you. Well, I don't think there will be any response. I think the views are very clear, and this is the main objective of the public hearing today, because they are rolling out the pilot. I hope you really would listen to the views of members to see how you can further enhance the service. KK Kwok. I'm so surprised by the understanding or lack of it on the part of government officials. We are talking about SEN children. No matter what kind of impairment they suffer from, whether they have SLI or sensory integration problems, if you stop the service at 6 years of age, I mean, you surprise me on end. If suddenly the world becomes perfect for these children when they turn 6, then of course all is good. But when you give us a written reply, please take away that kind of whatever kind of discretion you may have and you may be talking about. And I don't agree with the multi-layer contracting system. In fact, you yourself were trapped in a way because there is unnecessary administrative cost and it is of no benefit to the users, meaning patients. Now, in your process of assessment, I'd like to know whether you apply any objective criteria and whether you have the right people doing it. I mean, representatives from Preschool Parent Association not set up by you?
Maybe parents have tried out different services and they would be able to tell you the experience. And also, there are some experienced speech therapists who do not serve at HA or SWD. For this sector of service, all along, the government, whether it be the EDB or the SWD, they never paid attention to this kind of professional service. They never included this kind of service in their portfolio. So the experienced speech therapists in Hong Kong, practicing in Hong Kong, had been working privately. And if there is another round of having to include only experienced so-called speech therapists, then it is again going to be problematic. The service would not be good. No one will be able to guarantee the standard of service. So I would want to know the queue for waiting for inclusion. Now, as I've mentioned, these two pilot schemes are cross-profession, including a number of professionals. And for speech therapy, I have, before we launched the program, talked to the Hong Kong Association of Speech Therapists. I've talked to the University of Hong Kong, from education, from service. No, I'm referring to selection. I'm not talking about you talking to them. Let's talk about the pilot scheme first. I would collect the proposals from the NGOs and from their proposed service, do the assessment and selection. The EDB had just now talked about their procedure for selection. And I think we are on the same page, and that is, after the pilot scheme, how do we enhance the service that we provide? The chairman and also the professional sectors have met as well. And in the future, we want to see how we are able to enhance speech therapy service quality. And as I've mentioned just now, speech therapy will also have to interface with other professions, other professional services, from elderly to rehabilitation to preschool to school, SEN. We are putting in more speech therapy elements into all of these. And I've heard you all mention the long-term planning of the profession of speech therapy. This is important too, because in delivering the service, speech therapy is important as a part. And how do we make the public and the users confident about the service? This is something we're concerned about. Well, first of all, I would want to thank members for raising the questions. I know time is of the essence. I would like to know from the deputations, I can only allow 1 minute each. Final supplement from each of you if you want to speak. I see a few hands up. Mr. Wu Chi-kin, please. Thank you, Chair. I just want to say, just now, the Undersecretary said for those over 6 years of age, the students, if they have the need to be able to continue with their speech therapy service. I see clarification. Do the parents need to apply for this, or would the government department automatically continue the service for these children? And secondly, apart from the 6-year-olds, I would like to know, for those who are in the primary schools and have been professionally assessed as having to continue with speech therapy, can you put this in as a term, part of the term? Because the parents, on receiving that letter, they're very anxious. They do not know whether they need to apply to continue with the special speech therapy service. So can you please clarify that? And further, if the parent reflects to you that the school does not allow for interviews from SEN students, if you can follow up with that, because the parents will not reflect that to the department. So can you please proactively follow up with that? Ms. Poon Wan Wai? Thank you. The Undersecretary just now said why NGO only proposals are accepted, because they have cross-profession teams. I want to tell you that cross-profession teams and NGOs, there's no equal sign between the two. And you mentioned, the Undersecretary mentioned that he's talked to the private sector, and I would think that this is a bit late after the launch of the pilot scheme, after you have rolled it out. For NGO only, the only advantage is that you have less proposals to read, and you have less thoughts that are outside of NGOs that you have to consider. Perhaps you'll be nicely surprised when you receive proposals from us. As for school-based speech therapy service, even though the EDB had adjusted the stance, but in the originally you said very clearly to us that experience from the private sector did not count. And we had to show you why we're valuable, why our experience is worthy of consideration. I mean, if we have to go to this kind of steps to show you, then I think that would be deplorable. Mr. Lee Kam-shing, just now, Mr. Choi said that because the NGOs have the over 3 years of cross-profession service, but for all your NGOs, there is no elderly speech therapy experience. The NGOs had no professional team. It's actually after that they have won the bid that they form their team, and they have no manpower to do so. And they go to the private sector to find the therapists, including the speech therapists. And this is not right. And let us talk about the existing service. Existing speech therapists, they go to the homes to provide they do not take up dementia cases or serious dementia cases. They do not serve cases that have just been discharged from hospital for 3 months, and they do not serve elderly who have to be fed through a nose feed. Is that right, you think? Well, because of time, I think we will allow for written response to the questions raised just now. But we can allow one response from Mr. Choi. Yes, concerning Mr. Wu's point, we'll go back and look at it, but I want to clarify one point from you, and that is for the elderly service. As an example, elderly service is a cross-profession service, and our requirement is that the NGOs have continuous 3 years of elderly service and not elderly speech therapy experience for 3 years. That's not our requirement. So from what I understand from you, a lot of private practitioners, you serve individual users. But in this pilot program, as I have mentioned just now, it is a cross residential homes and profession service. So cross-residential elderly homes with a lot of service users in them. And in our past experience, the NGOs are more experienced in providing this kind of service. And I'm repeating myself again, in the future I will review the situation I just want to clarify, it is not because we want there to be fewer proposals that we have gone about this route, but rather the NGOs are more experienced in providing this kind of service. So for this round of the pilot program, at the launch, we have involved only these NGOs. And in the future, in terms of our selection, we want there to be more choice. And the objective is not to be low cost, but rather to provide the best service to the users, families, etc. So this is the first time, Chair, I'm sure, in the future, concerning the elderly, disabled, and preschool service, and perhaps it will also involve speech therapy. We would want there to be further enhancement of service to all. Well, I'm sure after this meeting, you would know that there are different individuals and organizations which can give you meaningful input. As for the 6-year-old, is that a line to draw? We await the response from the government, and I'm sure the professionals also agree that 6 years of age should not be the cutoff line. If there's no AOB, we will end the meeting here. Thank you.